Hello and welcome to my channel. My name is David Novak. I noticed that some booktubers at the start of every video give a brief introduction of themselves and their channel, and I don't tend to do that, and perhaps I ought. I will not make a feature of it, but I am formerly a writer of poetry. That was my predominant focus throughout most of my adult life, even a little bit of my childhood. And beginning with last year, January of 2022, I have been devoting myself to reading as opposed to writing. And earlier this year, I believe I wrote my final book of poetry. I've put up videos to all of this stuff. If you scroll through the backlog, you might find something. I'm not going to put any links there. So we're about 2 weeks away from the end of the year, and at that point I will make some kind of video talking about my year in review, especially as it fits into my greater project of trying to become a reader. Now, all those years that I was writing poetry, I was not oblivious to books. I did not scorn books. It's just I did not read a book unless I felt some sort of compulsion or need to read it. And more often than not, I would read a book and then not read anything for huge gaps of time. Of course, I was working and living life and doing all sorts of other things that took priority. Generally speaking, I would say living life should take priority. But throughout the years, I had at the back of my mind a secret burning desire to become a reader and even possibly to become a well-read individual. And I never made much headway into that. So I'm still far from really being where I would like with either of those, but I did decide that it was a goal worth actively pursuing. And at some point I may decide to give it up, give up the goal, give up the solid pursuit of reading. But for now, it's what I am occupying myself with. And so in spite of this channel's title of David Novak Reads Poetry, poetry is not and has not been my primary focus since I've started this BookTube channel. And I'm not sure when I started, if it was in June or something like that. But I mainly talk about what I've been reading and then what other sort of topics just happen to fly into my mind. So I would like to talk a little bit about what I'm reading now. This is John Kenneth Galbraith, The New Industrial State. And this is a reread for me. Only the second book I am attempting to reread this year. And both of those books are trying to fulfill the event of Remember December Rereadathon. It's an event started by, I believe, Roz at Scally Dandling about the books, but there are multiple hosts. Seeing that the event is going to be wrapping up relatively soon, I probably won't put links. I'll put a link to Roz's channel there in the description. But so this is a book that I read when I was a young man. I worked at a movie theater, and one of the guys there said, "Hey, let's do some reading," and he recommended this and Plato's Republic. Well, I think Republic, but I had a little anthology of writings by Plato that I believe included the Republic, and I can't remember if we decided that we were going to read the full thing or just that. And this was another book. And So far as I know, we didn't have any conversations about it. This friend was slightly my elder, and if anything, I would suppose that he would have talked at me about this because I suppose that he understood the book, whereas I hardly understood it. I think I fared a little better with Plato. Um, this was the first book of economics I had read, and I should say that it was not in this edition. This edition has been revised and updated since the one that I read. We're talking a long time ago. I was perhaps 20 years old, so we're talking 40 years, if not more, ago. Last year, I reread his The Affluent Society and enjoyed it. And in that case, I also hunted down the latest edition, something that would have more recent information. And as in this case, James K. Galbraith is some sort of relative who's, you see him on TV now, I think, perhaps a son. And he has an introduction placing the work into context, I believe. I have skimmed his introduction, but I have read all of John Kenneth Galbraith's introductory material. There's probably some 30 pages before the true pagination starts. So I read this last year and enjoyed it. I read it as a break from reading The Plum in the Golden Vase, which was a big book. Sometimes if I'm into something that's too hard and heavy, I'll just pick something else off the shelf and just peruse it. So for the rereadathon this year, I had started with Cheaper by the Dozen, and I'm halfway through that and not really loving it. And I forget what prompted me to decide to read this, and now I just pulled my finger out of the page. I want to read a little bit from this. Now there's a paragraph. This is chapter 4. I'm going to just read a little bit from part 7 of chapter 4, and then I'm going to go back and read something from part 6. So he talks a little bit about the economist John Maynard Keynes. When Keynes's The General Theory was published during the Great Depression and for 2 decades following World War II, the essential economic problem was, in fact, to offset savings and thus to maintain the level of output and income. For economists who, like most other people, are most at ease with the comfortable problems of the past, this concern became a tradition. It has so remained, even though in more recent times, inflation has become a major, perhaps the major, source of anxiety. I think he might have been making these revisions in the 70s. I have earlier memories to when I was working at the movie theater, growing up under the Carter presidency. And there was the oil crisis, and inflation was being talked about all the time. It was on the news, it was everywhere. And so I knew it was a serious topic and an important topic. Now, I don't know, I may be easing away from economics. It's never been a particular interest to me, but because of this book, I did get into it a little bit. So I remember trying to understand what all the hubbub and hullabaloo was about, and I thought real hard. I mean, you have to recall I'm probably talking about a 14-year-old boy, a very ignorant boy. And I thought about it and thought about it. And then I remember one day a light bulb went off and I understood why inflation was bad. That was how the debate was generally couched in the discourse of the day. And I really understood it in my own mind. And that was a light bulb moment. And then, of course, it disappeared. And I've never recaptured that intuitive understanding that I had on that day at that moment. And that's how this kind of topic goes for me. Others do as well. You're lucky if you capture that joy as it flies in eternity's sunrise. So I don't remember what I understood about inflation at that time, and I have now grown to a point where I probably don't care. Just because everybody else is talking about a thing does not mean it's a thing of import or importance to me. So I would like to read the next little bit. For the first 3 chapters of this, I was patting myself on the back because I felt that I was really understanding this book much better than I did when I read it as a young man. The fluid sentences were penetrating my noggin, and the concepts I felt were fairly straightforward and understandable. Well, with chapter 4, that has changed a little bit. Now, I intend to pursue the book through to the finish. It's, I think, something like 35 chapters, and this may be a sign of the rest of the book. I read it as a young man, not understanding very much, and if that be the case in duplicate, then so be it. So let me read this paragraph. If savings go unused, that is to say are unspent, demand for goods in the economy is by this much reduced. Sales of goods then fall below expected or planned levels and employment falls. Outside of the planning system, prices and employment also fall. This will lead to reduction in investment outside the planning system and, with some delay, to a curtailment of planned investment within. In other words, a failure to use all that corporations and individuals seek to save sets in motion the processes of recession and depression. These will continue until they reduce savings to the point where all are being absorbed by the smaller volume of investment. If, in the opposite case, the economy is functioning at or near the capacity of its plant, I have a cat down there that's distracting me. I'm afraid something's going to happen. If, in the opposite case, the economy is functioning at or near the capacity of its plant or labor force or both, and corporations seek to invest in the aggregate more than the equivalent of the current supply of savings, there will be more spending for investment and consumption than the economy can accommodate. The result will be a bidding up of prices and, most markedly, of the market prices outside of the planning system. This is inflation. The lurking threat of these discomforts thus requires that the planning system have machinery on the one hand for ensuring that savings are used, and on the other for ensuring that use is limited to the savings that are available. So it's a paragraph worth contemplating, but I can't say that I know what he's talking about. I like the tie-in with my boyhood recollection of a brief moment, a brief eureka moment of enlightenment as to the topic, which I promptly forgot and still don't know about. Perhaps I will revisit this paragraph. I am moving ahead with this book. Economic thought is not my forte. In general, it probably goes against my grain a little bit. But I thought I would just give a little show and tell of my John Maynard Keynes books. I have others by Galbraith, but I didn't want to find them and pull them down. I read as a young adult, not immediately after the new industrial state, but sometime later when I was in my first apartment, and I like his prose style, and I read The Culture of Contentment, and I read, which I enjoyed, but I don't think I would revisit. I read another one, and I can't remember the title of it, but it's all about what he calls condign punishment, C-O-N-D-I-G-N. I could never understand what he was trying to say with that phrase, and I don't think I would revisit that either. At the time, I felt that there was something in his setup that wasn't quite right. May be wrong, may not. Perhaps I will read another one because I understand that the affluent society and the new industrial state form a trilogy with a third book, which I have in the original mass market paperback, picked up last year. And I would like to give it a shot, but I am not sure. I may decide at the end of this that I'm not going to go any further. But as a young fellow, this is when I was working up in Evanston in those early temp jobs. There used to be a number of bookstores that I would prowl into, and I saw there this one time, and I've read this a couple of times. Perhaps next year I can reread this in December, keeping to my one book of economics per year habit, if it becomes a habit. Habits are not something that you should try to entrench, however. I remember enjoying this. Again, not understanding much, and economic theory all, I believe, becomes fairly dated. But perhaps having read this before tackling the Galbraith would have been a smarter move. And I also read this when I was a young man. This was also very nice. I actually would not mind revisiting all of my works by Keynes because I think I had absolutely no worldly sophistication at the time that I was reading those. I can't lay claim to much after 40 some years, but I might understand the context a little bit better. I just recently finished the books by E.D. Morel about the First World War. I wouldn't mind hearing what Keynes had to say. And then these books were really hard to track down. The Essays in Persuasion. I don't remember any of this now, but I remember enjoying this one. And the Essays in Biography, which I really did not enjoy. I'm not much of a fan of biographies, for one thing, and then it was all too disconnected from any lived reality for me. I could not relate. So I kind of suspect that if I were to reread all of these books by Keynes, that I would get more out of this one as well. So I thought I would give you this show and tell. These happen to be easily accessible. I might as well put Galbraith there too. There's a stack for you. Economics is not the thing that I would advise coming to this channel for. If the gods of reading are with me and put some wind in my sails, I would love to finish the current books I have started before the year closes. But that lies largely out of my control. I will leave the topic there. Thank you very much for stopping by my channel.